from there. Well, let me introduce myself now that I've shared my embarrassment. My name is Jennifer Taylor. I'm the audit supervisor with the FEFP review section of the Auditor General. David Hughes, who was the audit manager, who was presented to you in the past, today is his last official day with the office. So he is retiring. So the gauntlet was handed over to me. So what I'm going to talk about today, just the different types of FTE findings that we're writing in our audit reports for the 1920 school year. That's what we're looking at right now. We're always a year behind you guys. I know y'all are gearing up for the 21-22 school year. So I'm past tense a little bit, but a lot of these will still apply. Unfortunately, because it is the 1920 school year, I won't be able to have a lot of information concerning the COVID shutdowns and any executive orders that were issued as a result of that. But we're going to talk about the different findings that we have. We've got some disclosure findings and reporting issues, attendance and enrollment, ESOL and ESE, teachers and transportation, and then estimating the financial impact, because everybody wants to know, what's the bottom line effect of these. So that is how we're going to proceed. And I told Katie, if you do have questions throughout, I'm happy to stop and answer them. I might be focused on this, so she just got to wave me down and let me know. Okay, so the first screen here is just the definition of the abbreviations. Most of us know all of these. It's just the lingo of education and FTE. I hear that this presentation is going to be made available online. So if you need to go back and refer to them, this would be the page to go to. Okay, we're going to start with disclosure findings and reporting issues. So disclosure findings are what we call administrative findings that we write just because that we're seeing some issues that need to be addressed, but they don't have any FTE adjustments related to them. So they won't have any funding effect to that. The first one is student course schedules and the school bell schedules. Ever since recalibration came into effect, the school bell schedules have become much more important, especially if you have students that are in your district in one survey and another district in another survey. You've got to share the FTE. So you want to make sure it's reported accurately as to what actually happened in the instructional time. So if we see differences between the school's bell schedule and the students' reported schedules, we will go ahead and issue this disclosure finding, letting you know of the differences and to let you know to check it out, see if we can fix it. I know some of the programs, the SIS programs, are hard to kind of squeeze in the individual schedules that are going on, but to get it as close as possible is great. All right, so then you have students that are reported in the incorrect program. This is seen most with ESE students, reporting where the student's entire schedule is not reported in ESE program, or hospital homebound students on campus schedules incorrectly reported in program 255, that high weighted hospital homebound funding. A lot of times we'll see a student in 111, 112, 113 who might have one class that got reported in program 103, and we make the adjustment from 103 to 113. That's a total wash adjustment there, no funding effect. But if you do have a hospital homebound student who is reporting their on-campus schedule at that high-weighted program 255, that adjustment will be back down to the 111, 112, 113, and that's where you'll see your funding effect from that. Okay. All right, next thing is the 900, 720 hour rule. So the FTE instructions, the Florida statutes, and the Florida Administrative Code state that schools must operate for 180 days or the hourly equivalent to be fully funded by the FEFP. So we look at the district calendar and count the number of instructional days. If it's 180, that's great. Transportation 90, that would be fine. We also look towards how many minutes of instruction took place. So if you have a bell schedule at a school that's right at 1,500 class minutes weekly, which for 180 days, which would equal that 900 hours, you have early release days, you have senior release, sometimes they get done 2 weeks early. That's taken into consideration too and deducted from the instructional time. So schools that are really close to that 1,500 minute instructional day or instructional week, can run into problems with this. And what we have done is we've made adjustments. A lot of them are for seniors, some are for particular schools who just didn't have enough instructional time, adjusting the FTE down to what actually happened. All right, so, and I think that's basically what I said here. If they fall below the 900 or 720, the adjustment reduces it down. Okay, so attendance and enrollment. These are the driving forces of FTE reporting. If you don't have attendance and enrollment, it doesn't matter what services you're going to provide or anything else, you can't report the student. So if the student is not enrolled in school during the survey week, can't be reported. If the student is not in attendance at school at least one day of the 11-day survey window, can't be reported. Now, it only has to be one period of one day. A lot of times with these automated attendance systems, you know, a teacher might forget to check attendance and they get recorded as present, and we see it for one period out of the whole 2-week period. And we question that and we'll say, was this just an error? Or were they really here? And if they can provide additional documentation, we do count that. Another important thing, because of the automated attendance systems out there, the teachers don't keep source attendance records anymore, like attendance books or cards or anything that they used to turn into the data clerks to update into the system. So they're actually going into the system and updating it themselves. So we need to check and make sure that the teachers are logging in and completing their attendance for each of their classrooms. For elementary, just that one time a day. For secondary, we're looking for period by period. So we look at those completed attendance reports or teacher completion reports, or I know sometimes in Focus, you can go to the attendance chart, hover over it, and you can see if the teacher submitted attendance themselves or if it was a data clerk. And as long as the teachers are signing in and doing it regularly, we accept that attendance as source attendance. Okay, so programmatic attendance. We have some time cards that cannot be provided for career education students who participated in OJT. So time cards for OJT students are the attendance for them because they are off campus. That is how we know that they are actually working the time. Most OJT courses, each course is about worth 5 hours of work. And we look at the survey week and the weekend prior, because a lot of the kids work on the weekends as well. And recalculate the amount of time that they worked. As long as they're over that minimum number of hours, they're okay. If they're under it, we adjust down to what they actually reported. Now, there are situations when there's patterns that the kids, they have a regular schedule and every other week documents that they're on that schedule. This one week they were sick or something happened, or special situation that's documented on the time card, we can accept that. Also, these time cards need to be signed by the employers to attest to the work hours that the students completed. So if they're not signed, then that's the problem too. Okay, so another one is homebound instructors contact logs. So students that are served only in hospital homebound, these contact logs are the source attendance for these students. So if they can't be provided to document the direct instruction to homebound students, then that instruction, that FTE would be reduced to 0. Okay. And then I think I mentioned part of this already, but a partial reduction in reported FTE is made when a student's schedule, as documented by the time cards or by the contact logs, reflects less than the reported class minutes weekly. So again, if the time cards for OJT students reflect fewer hours worked than the FTE that was reported, that would adjust it. If the homebound instructor's contact logs document fewer hours of direct instruction, we also look at the student's IEPs to see what was scheduled. If both of those are less than what was reported, then the FTE will be adjusted down as well. Okay. ESOL. Adjustments for ESOL are generally from weighted FTE to unweighted FTE. So you're going from program 130 to one of the basic programs. There is not much of a funding difference between those two programs. So these are the findings. We do see a lot of them. And if there's a large number, it can add up. But individually, they're not costing the districts a lot in their, FTE adjustments. But we have different scenarios that would require us to adjust down from program 130. So this first one is students reported in ESOL longer than 6 years or 12 semesters. So if the student is still eligible for ESOL and he's still, testing that he needs it, keep him in the program, but you got to report him in basic after the 6 years, because if after that, we make the adjustment to basic. And if there's documentation issues that wasn't provided or timely reported to the survey period, such as the ELL plan, the parent notification, the ELL assessment, the ELL committee meeting, if anything is missing from that documentation, it's also an adjustment down to the basic funding level. And when I say timely reported to the survey period and all of this, all of the documentation, we look to make sure that it's completed by date certain of survey week. So that would be the Friday of survey week would be the last day that this could be done and still get reported. And then also the parent invitation and participation in the ELL committee meetings is not documented. This is real important. They want to make sure the parents are involved, and if they're not involved, they're at least aware that the meetings are going on. So if that is not there, then it would also be adjusted down to basic. Okay, so we have ELL assessments and committee meetings are not timely to the students' dues. I love the date entered US schools. It was so confusing when it first started, and it's still kind of confusing, but basically it drives at the timing of the ELL assessments and the ELL committee meetings. So you could have a student who entered a US school 3 years ago, and now they are in your district on the 4th year. They've never been placed in ESOL. You're placing them in ESOL. This is year 4. It's more than 3 years from the deuce. They still have to have an ELL committee meeting on that 4th year, even though it's just an initial placement. And it's just because the deuce drives that. But if the student's deuce falls between the release of the assessments that were done in the spring and October 1st, those assessments will suffice. So if you start in August, you can use the ELPA or the FSA and ELA from the prior spring to assess that student. If you have a student with a mid-year deuce, so they started in a US school after October 1st, then you have to have a different ELL assessment, and committee meetings must be completed within 30 days prior to the student's due. So at this point, you give them the IPT or some other assessment that you would have that you use to assess the ELPA. And that timing, like I said, the deuce drives the timing on that. So if these are off, these adjustments are also ESOL to basic. Okay, on to ESE. Most adjustments are from weighted FTE to unweighted FTE. If we have 254, 255 program students and we have problems and we're adjusting them down, that's one of those instances. We might have a problem with a gifted student. There's not an educational plan in the student's file. In that case, we would adjust from gifted, which would probably be 111, 112, 113, back to their related basic area. And that would be no funding adjustment there. It's just when you go from those 254, 255s down to the basic with ESE services or basic that it becomes a larger issue. So one of the first things is the student is not reported in accordance with the matrix of services form. This can be adjusted either way. So say we have a student who's reported in program 254, but the matrix supports program 113 and it's valid before the survey, everything's good with it. We're going to adjust that student to 113 for that survey. But if we do see a valid matrix supporting program 254 and the student's reported in basic with ESE services, we'll also adjust them up. So we do make positive adjustments every now and then. I know some districts don't think we do, but we do, it happens. And okay, so another situation, documentation again, the IEP or the matrix of services form is not provided. If any of that documentation is missing, we adjust down to the basic or basic with ESE services. Documentation is incomplete or untimely. Again, we're looking at that date certain of the reporting survey period. So the documentation and parent invitation to the IEP meeting cannot be located. Again, just like with ESOL, with ESE, we want to make sure that the parents are involved with the meetings. If they're not there, then we need to make sure that they are aware of the meetings. So we look at that parent invitation to make sure they were notified of it. An example of incomplete documentation is a matrix of services form where individual services in each domains are not marked. So you can have domain A might be marked level 5 which is the highest weight of services, but there's no individual services in level 5. And in that case, we look at whatever level has services marked and we recalculate based on that. So that could cause an adjustment as well. Okay. Hospital homebound. This one's always fun, especially if you have itinerant, but again, documentation issues. We got to have the physician statement, the IEP, and the matrix. If that's not available, we adjust from the weighted FTE to the unweighted FTE. Itinerant homebound, which is students that serve both in school and at home, depending on, how they're feeling, what kind of medical services they need to have, things like that. These students can be reported with both schedules, the homebound schedule and the school schedule, at the same time, and they only need to have documentation of attendance in one of those, as long as this is the schedule and it reflects the actual situation. What we run into a lot of times is students reported course schedules does not reflect the actual situation. So they're reported for both services, but they're actually back in school full time. We see that a lot. Homebound was discontinued and it just didn't get changed in time for the reporting. So they also got reported for homebound time and school time. And in that case, we would take whatever service is not being provided and adjust that out. All right, so attendance documentation is not available for either service location. Like I mentioned, when you have both of the services going on, attendance in one or the other suffices to cover both, as long as that's what's scheduled. But if attendance at school is not documented, there's no contact logs, the FTE gets adjusted to 0 for that. Another situation for homebound is when the students don't qualify for the 13 special consideration points on the matrix of services form. A lot of times if a student goes to school some and is at home some, sometimes the school level FTE also gets reported at that high weight 255. And if they're in a classroom or if they're working on an online platform, not getting direct instruction, then they're most likely not eligible for that 255 weighting. So that adjusts from the weighted to the unweighted FTE. Okay, so on to teacher certification. All adjustments are from weighted FTE to unweighted FTE. One of the main ones is the teacher has no Florida teaching certificate. So that's the first thing we look for our instructors. Unless they're a district issued certificate, that's fine too. If they're considered an expert in their field, if the district has policies about that and they're following those policies, that is fine too. But if it's a certified position and the teacher has no Florida teaching certificate, the weighted FTE is adjusted back to basic for those teachers. Now, a lot of times I'm asked, is the statement of eligibility okay? Because we're coming in a year later after the fact that this already happened, there should be a certificate in place by then. And if there's not, we ask the districts to request that DOE issue it, backdate it until that first year so we have the certificate. That's the important thing. All right, so another situation, teachers have insufficient or untimely, again, after the reporting survey period, in-service training points or credits earned in ESOL strategies or in out-of-field subject area. So if a teacher is teaching ESOL for a number of years and they're teaching primary language arts, they have to earn 60 points a year to get to that 300 points. So we look at their history. If they don't have the amount that they should have, then the ESOL gets adjusted to basic. Okay, substitute teachers, another favorite area. Substitute teachers are allowed in rule and statute. Substitute teachers are also listed as instructional personnel. And there is a part of the rules that say instructional personnel, including substitutes, should be certified. And it does say that in certain places. We are starting to write findings for substitute teachers. A couple of the criteria we look at is the situation, is the substitute there for a vacancy or is it a temporary placement? So if the substitute is filling a vacancy, there isn't a teacher of record that is on leave or anything like that, we're going to look for certification for that substitute. And if there isn't any, or if they are certified, sometimes we have retired subs that come back, but they're certified, but they're just out of field. They weren't approved out of field. Parents weren't notified. They're going to be, the weighted FTE will be adjusted from them as well. And the second criteria is that, are they providing direct instructional services? So you can have a substitute that's on temporary placement, but they are they're replacing a teacher who is coming back, but they are doing planning, they're inputting student grades, doing all of the stuff that a teacher would do. So if they're filling a vacancy or if they're providing direct instructional services, we hold substitute certification requirements of a regular teacher. Okay. On to transportation. The adjustments noted below decrease the number of students reported. So transportation doesn't report FTE, it's just in number of students. So negative adjustments result from the following issues. So one of the big things, missing, unsigned, and untimely bus drivers reports. Now, bus drivers reports are the attendance for transportation. They document the students' ridership during the survey period. So if they can't be located, any of the students that are reported on that bus would be adjusted. If they're unsigned, the bus driver needs to attest to the accuracy of the ridership that's marked on those reports. So if they're unsigned, that is an issue as well. In 1920, we have been doing administrative findings, disclosure findings, and management comments if they don't date them. I'm sorry. If they're unsigned, it's an adjustment, but if they're not dated, then we did administrative. If they do date them, but they're untimely to the ridership marked. So say a bus driver gets it on the first day of survey and they go ahead and they sign it and they date it because they want to make sure they're doing everything right, but then all the ridership is marked after that date. It doesn't attest to the ridership that is marked because you're signing it on a certain date. That's the date you're attesting that ridership. So when we run into that, we've been adjusting students from buses too. A lot of these, that is one thing that is a common thing that is taken to DOE appeal, and definitely well worth doing because it can be a lot of students that you did transport, and just having this documentation completed correctly would cost a lot, just if you didn't have that opportunity to appeal it, but that's the way we are looking at it there. Okay, so then you could have some ineligible students reported. You have students that are unidentified. They don't have any demographics in the student information system. A lot of times if you have students coming from other districts, you won't have them in your system, or if you're taking students to other districts, it might be the same way. A lot of times we can work out to identify what the programs are, who those students are, and to make sure they're eligible. But if they can't be identified, that they would be adjusted as well. If we have PK students that are not IDEA students and not the children of teenage parents, then we would adjust them out too, because pre-K students in other categories like Head Start or school readiness, things like that, are funded under different programs, not under the FEFP. So we would adjust those. Also, K through 12 students reported in surveys 1 or 4, not IDEA students and not transported to non-residential DJJ programs. So in the summer surveys, the only thing that's funded through FEFP are the ESE students and students that are transported to non-residential DJJs. So anybody else, they'd have to be adjusted out. If we have secondary students reported in hazardous walking, it's only eligible for elementary students, so that would be an automatic adjustment. And then if we run into reported students who weren't enrolled in a brick and mortar school, like if they were McKay scholarship students, homeschool students, virtual students, a lot of times things will roll over from the prior year and they'll get onto the bus drivers reports and somehow they get marked as riding. I don't know how, if they're not riding, but that happens and they get reported. So those get adjusted off. And then also enrollment and ridership issues. Again, this is just like attendance in the classroom. If you're not enrolled in school during the survey week, you're not eligible. If you don't ride the bus at least once during the 11-day survey window, you're not eligible either. Okay, so the adjustments noted below may decrease the number of students reported or may adjust the reporting from one membership category to another. So this first one, reported students do not meet the criteria for the reported membership category. So say you have a student that's reported in category L, which is the IDEA K through 12 weighted, one of our weighted ESE programs. and you look for an IEP and you look for specialized transportation services on that IEP, like an aid or monitor, the student has a wheelchair, some other assistive device, and it's not documented there, then we would look to see, is the student eligible for category M, which is our unweighted catch-all. Are they 2 miles or more from school? Does that IEP authorize transportation, even though it doesn't say weighted services? And if it does, we'll switch them from that category over to another category. So this second part, if the student is eligible to report in another membership category, the adjustment will be that category. This could result in an increase. We might have a student reported in category M, but they actually have an IEP that provides or documents the weighted transportation services. So we'll jump them up to a category L based on that. The decrease, what I originally talked about, going from category L to category M because the weighted services were not noted, or a lateral shift. Say if you have a student in hazardous walking, and that's category G. If they live over 2 miles from school, they're not eligible for hazardous walking, but they are for all others living 2 miles or more. So category M, G to M, there's no difference in funding. So it can be either one. So if the student is not eligible to be reported in another membership category, the reported student will be adjusted to 0. So if you're not eligible for funding and you got reported and there's nothing else, no other category you can go into, it'll just be adjusted out. Okay. I must be really explaining this very well, or y'all are asleep. There's no questions yet. I'm almost done. Okay, so estimating the financial impact of FTE adjustments. I probably should have bolded this because we are always preaching this to everybody that we talk to. The final determination of the financial impact of all adjustments is the responsibility of the DOE. So once the reports are issued, the districts respond to the reports and the appeals are done, then the DOE makes that final adjustment into the district's budget. And they use complicated formulas to figure everything out. There are a couple of ways just to estimate as you're going along to say about how much it would cost you. And for FTE adjustments, you would use the base student allocation, which was a little over 4,200 in the 2019-20 school year. You just multiply that by the weighted FTE and the adjustment to give you an idea. In our reports, we do provide an estimate of the dollar amount of FTE adjustments. We do not do that for transportation because it is not as easy to do. The best, closest thing you can do is look up the annual allocations in the Florida School District Transportation Profiles published by the DOE. That'll tell you how much a basic student gets annually and how much more an ESE student gets annually. When we make our adjustments, it is by survey, and there are 4 surveys in a year, so it's not an annual number, and it's kind of hard to match it up, but you play with that, you can kind of get an idea about it. Okay, and that is the end of what I had. I provided my contact information, my email address, and my phone number. If anyone has anything after this conference they think of, feel free to email me or call, and I will do my best to answer it. And I guess if are there any questions now? I see one over here.
Hello.
Oh,
Hi, Jennifer from Citrus County.
okay.
You didn't mention days in term, and that has been planned in the past, and maybe some people want to know about that.
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I briefly said something about if you have 180 days in your calendar, transportation can do 90 and 90. And that's what you normally see. If you're short on days, then we also look for the number of days actually transported during the year to see how much transportation can report. If there is a hurricane and the district is closed down for a week, or something else that, everything with COVID, with the shutdowns and everything like that, If DOE provides a waiver for those days, the districts can request them for individual circumstances, or they can do big state orders like they did for COVID. Then we can waive those days for the days in term for transportation. But if there is not a waiver, then we look at the district's calendar and see how many days they were transported during the year, including, we don't count any planned holidays, or if they are closed because of a hurricane or something like that, we don't count those days because the buses aren't running. And then we do adjust all of the students that were reported, say if they were reported for 90 days in October, there was a hurricane that closed down the school for 3 days, we're only going to report 87 days. So we're going to adjust all of those students from 90 to 87. And this is another one of those that you really cannot determine the financial effect until DOE actually does their manipulations and comes out with the magic number. So did that answer your question or clarify anything with that? Okay. Anything else? There's one over here and one over there. Okay, hold on 1 second. Oh, okay. Okay. Yes, the question was, are the slides going to be posted? I did get them to Katie, but it was once the conference already started, so she wasn't able to put it, but she said she will get it out there. So you'll have this contact information and all of that. Okay, yes, ma'am. That was it? Okay. Anything else? All right. Oh, there's one in the back.
This is more maybe.
Hey.
Could you maybe go back to the slide and discuss a little bit more about that last bullet relating to substitutes? When the appropriate circumstance for reporting that subcode.
I knew that was going to come up. This is still kind of a gray area for all of us. A lot, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history of this and why we're starting to look at it more closely. In the past, for years, if there was a teacher placed into a classroom and they were hired as a substitute, we said, okay, they're hired as a substitute. Let me see the documentation to show that that's their position. That's what they're hired as. They're a substitute, check mark. Okay. Well, we started running into a lot of issues, especially with charter schools, where they were hiring all of their teachers as substitutes. So they weren't certifying anybody and nobody was in field. And we're like, this is not what was meant by these rules and these allocations, and you're allowed to have substitutes and things like that. So that's why we started looking into this a little more closely. And through discussions with DOE and among ourselves at our meetings, that's when these kind of situations came up, what's acceptable and what is not. Like I said, if you are substituting and you are substituting in a classroom with a vacancy, unless you are just there one day, basically we're looking at substitutes that get reported as the teacher of record, because that's how they get flagged to us. So most of these substitutes are there for a longer period of time, at least a couple of weeks to cover the survey. They get reported for as the teacher of record. If it is a vacancy, that's when we go ahead and we say, okay, we're going and this is mainly our decision to be consistent throughout the state in our audits so that one district doesn't get treated differently from another district. So if there's a vacancy, that's when we ask for certification. If the substitute got reported as the teacher of record, we're going to look to see, were they a certified teacher? Were they in field? And if not, we would make adjustments on that. If it is a temporary placement, first we would look, okay, what's the situation? This teacher went on maternity leave for 3 months or whatever, but the teacher had already planned everything out for the substitute. She knew it was going to happen. She had 9 months to prepare for it. And she planned everything out. The substitute is just going through the plan and doing the thing, and the teacher is coming back. Then that's a situation that we would look at and we say, okay, this is okay. They're actually treating it like a substitute. They're not doing the planning. They're not inputting grades. The teacher might be doing that when she gets back or something like that. But it's very situation specific as to what's going on in the actual school, in the classroom. And that's why I did present earlier at the FAFPA conference last year, and I made a comment about vacancy versus temporary placement, and that was going to be the line that we drew. Well, then we had some findings after the fact that were not substitutes placed in a vacant position, but it was a long-term situation to where they were there, you know, surveys 2 and 3, they were doing everything that the teacher would do. The teacher was not involved at all. And we made adjustments there. And my presentation at FAFPA came back to bite me because they said, well, wait, you said if this was not a vacancy, it's okay. So that's why I went ahead and added here providing direct instructional services. So it is very situational. We look at what's going on at the school, what the situation is it a vacancy? Is there a teacher coming back? Did the teacher plan the materials beforehand? Is the substitute actually doing everything a teacher would do? And if they are doing everything a teacher would do, we're still going to look for that certification. So does that clarify anything for you?
Well, I mean, so let's say that why survey teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So you had a vacancy. So you had a legitimate substitute that does not have teacher certification in the class. Is that a scenario where you substitute or is this scenario
that in our view, and you know, that's a special situation, and it seems obvious that, yeah, obviously that's a substitute teacher and there's another teacher being placed. It was so close to survey, but because of what we're looking at with it is a vacant position, they got reported as the teacher of record. You need to have somebody in the classroom in a certified position for that vacancy over the survey to be reported at that time to qualify. Now, there are situations where there's substitute certificates issued. And if we have that, that's something that we have accepted also. I think that's a district issue type thing. I haven't actually run into them in any of the districts I've been in yet, but it's a very fluid area, and we're trying to be consistent across the board. And that's why we tell a lot of our districts too, if you don't agree with the adjustments we've made or think it's a special situation that you should have, you know, approved it or put it in correctly, done it the right way, that was the right way to do it, then go ahead and appeal any findings to the DOE. And once that gets through the process and everything, what we're hoping is that through the appeals process and through DOE's involvement with this, it will kind of narrow down the playing field as to what's allowed and what's not. So that's kind of the route that we're taking right now.
No, I don't know why you were nervous. You're doing such a great job.
Thank you. There you are.
So I just want to say that, and before we take that question, because there's a lot of movement to learn. Y'all are not missing anything because we're going to come around your tables and have that session. If you're not missing anything, it's okay.
Hi, how are you? Yes, hello. Okay. 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 So it depends on the students that are reported in the class. If it is a substitute teacher that is teaching a basic math class full of basic students, it's going to be a disclosure finding because there's nothing to adjust. There's no weighted funding to adjust. And that's how with teachers, when we have problems with anything, with documentation, with substitutes, with timeliness of things getting done, we take any of the weighted programs that are reported under that teacher and adjust them to basic. So ESOL, which is a very minor one, we have a lot of them with teachers because of the ESOL points, but it doesn't affect a lot financially. Where this becomes a problem, and we have had a few substitutes that are teaching in a weighted ESC classroom, like an ASD setting or something like that, and they're in that classroom, they're reporting students in 254 and 255. If they're flagged and they're adjusted, you're losing the students weighting from 254 to 255. So it can be very big. It can go from nothing to enormous. And that's why we encourage appealing to DOE on findings like that too. Okay, anything else? All right, I made it. No disasters. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm good. How are you doing? Yes, Duval, right? No. Oh, I know this. Okay. Okay, yes. He did
Oh,
a
yes,
great,
okay.
okay. Thank you.
Sorry, you did a great job.
Okay, good, good. Yes, was that the virtual one last year that we did, or were you at the live one? Well, I mean, you guys went. Okay.
Yeah. Just put it right here. Thank you so much.
Okay, okay, yes.
Tell them to sit right there. I was like, man, I was going to tell you a funny story about what you said too.
Okay.